Hello and good evening to you, and welcome into the WLOX Digital Desk. I'm Hugh Keeton. We hope you're having a great Thursday night. We're almost to Friday, pretty much already there as we get up in the morning and be ready to go for Friday. Tonight here at the Digital Desk, we're talking about tidelands here on the Mississippi Gulf Coast, and this is legislation that goes back several decades related to properties on the water and why these tidelands leases exist and what was the purpose of them to start with. Our reporter from WLOX, Noah Noble, has really been digging into this tidelands issue over the last several days, and we do have a new development with tidelands today in the state legislature. The state Senate officially passed Bill 2780, and this was a bill that some local leaders here on the coast expressed concerns over. And now let me bring in Noah Noble to talk more about this. So local leaders are concerned about this bill that passed unanimously in the state Senate today. What was the biggest concerns, do you feel like, with the legislature making this latest move with tidelands?
Well, Hugh, the biggest concern from our local leaders down here is that they simply were left in the dark about this bill, and they felt they didn't have a voice. They felt all of this was kind of rushed through, and they didn't have any input or even were brought in for questions with the Secretary of State or even senators, even though all the coast senators down here voted for that bill. As you said, it passed unanimously. Local leaders were just worried that they didn't have any input, even though they're the ones who are arguably going to be impacted the most.
So when we're talking about tidelands, really this is an issue that came about with casinos. Since you've been looking into this, and this is a complicated issue, and we throw out the word tidelands all the time. We always hear it when there's a new casino development potentially coming in. But what did you learn about, because you went through many documents to get to sort of the bottom of what it means, of the purpose of tidelands, and what is the benefit? Why are they even in place to start with?
Well, Hugh, there's a reason all the casinos are located on waterfront property, and it's not just because the water looks nice. Casinos are required to be within 800 feet of the tidelands. It's defined as the mean high tide level, and that's kind of iffy because the tide always rises and falls. So basically, it's anything south of the seawall. If you're on Highway 90, you're looking out at the water, where that seawall is, including the beach area, is all state property. Casinos, as you may remember, Hugh, I know when I was a little young at the time, but casinos started off on water. They were on vessels, and those required tidelands leases because they were on the water. Well, after 2005, with Hurricane Katrina devastating our area, they allowed those casinos to move onshore within 800 feet, and that's why all those casinos are down here. It was a lot of reading I had to do. I felt like I had to get a law degree just to figure out what all this stuff meant.
Okay, so let's take a look now at the story. You did all of this reading, research on tidelands, and you put it together in a report during last night's newscast on WLOX. Let's take a look at that report. It goes in depth as you take a deep dive on tidelands and the concerns from local leaders. Let's watch that story now.
This is some real a can of worms that's going to be opened up that have broad-reaching implications. We never have been contacted by the Secretary of State or any of the people who seem to be behind, the changing of the rules.
I mean, why are you making a county on a beach do a tidelands lease? I mean, what purpose is that other than your desire to control? I mean, that's really what it's about.
I was going to say, do you think that's what it comes down to?
That's what it is to me.
What does Senate Bill 2780 say that prompted these comments from Biloxi's mayor and Harrison County's attorney? Well, first let's get some context. Tidelands are at the crux of this bill. Tidelands are any area south of the seawall, including beaches, and are the state's property. To use that property, the state requires tideland leases, basically a rental agreement. But for decades now, cities and counties had direct authority of public use areas on tidelands, like piers, harbors, marinas, and boat launches. That means they don't need a lease and don't need state approval for what they do on those sites. But this line in SB 2780 takes away that authority and puts it in the hands of the Secretary of State through mandatory tidelands leases. And it requires leases for any commercial activity.
To have to go to Jackson on every time you do something on the sand beach, where are they going to draw the line? We got fire pits down there. We're going to have a tidelands lease on the fire pits. It's another layer of bureaucracy you have to go through just to put a fire pit. I mean, is that what they're going to do? We don't know. Nobody's discussed it with the county.
Pass Christian Long Beach, Gulfport, Biloxi. We don't need the Secretary of State to tell us how to operate a marina and a boat harbor. We've been doing it a long time.
Jim Simpson is an attorney for the city of Long Beach. He's also a former state representative that drafted House Bill 45. In October 2005, it established laws that allowed casinos to move off the water and onto shore in response to the devastation of Hurricane Katrina.
The idea was, we can't have this happen again. Let's allow the casinos, which we had required be over the water, let's allow them to move onto the land, but only in certain places. We don't want them to proliferate everywhere. We want to define where they can go.
House Bill 45, which is law right now, requires casinos to be located within 800 feet of tidelands and must have a property connection to the water, which requires a tideland lease. Where casinos are built within those parameters is left up to the cities, and ultimate approval comes from the Gaming Commission. But Senate Bill 2780 amends that, giving exclusive control of where future casinos can locate in the hands of the Secretary of State. Particularly, new casinos cannot be located on the beach or adjacent to it, but they are still required to be within 800 feet of the seawall and must own all property in between.
But it would prohibit casinos in a lot of places where they're allowed now. And that's what I'm worried about.
Here's some examples. The Beau Rivage in Biloxi, Beach View in Gulfport, and Silver Slipper in Waveland are all located next to sand beaches. So they would not have been allowed to build under this bill. But Secretary of State Michael Watson says this is simply about creating a level playing field.
And I think the important piece here is it gives stability and certainty to the market, to our gaming industry, which is so incredibly important. And I'll tell you this, we've worked very hard with Senator Thompson, with Senator Blunt, many of our coast legislators, Senator Delano and others, to make sure that we're getting a piece of legislation that's good for everybody.
While many questions remain unanswered, perhaps the most interesting is why now? Many are pointing to the state Supreme Court's blow to the Secretary of State's office in its legal fight against Biloxi and the Veterans Avenue Pier with RW Development. The state's highest court sided with Biloxi that a public-private pier does not need a tidelands lease. But this Senate bill would circumvent that by squashing the law that Biloxi built its case on.
And so that was Noah Noble's report from the WLOX newscast on Wednesday night. If you want to read more about it and sort of digest it more, you can go to WLOX.com. We have the story there linked for you, and you can read down if you want to learn more about what this potentially means. And as we said, Noah goes in depth on the tidelands and the procedures for all of it, going back for several decades since Hurricane Katrina. And now let's bring Noah Noble back in with us here so we can talk more about this. So today, the Senate bill passes that you talked about there in the story, despite the concerns from the local leaders. But there were some provisions and additional amendments added to this overall bill.
Yeah, Hugh, as you just heard, one of the biggest concerns from our coastal leaders was that tidelands leases were going to be required for all ports, harbors, marinas, piers, boat launches, whereas right now they aren't required a tidelands lease, and they can operate how they see fit within the cities and counties. They have the authority to make those changes. As SB 2780 was originally written, all that would be under the Secretary of State's control, so they were worried that they would have to get permission to, in Harrison County's instance, put a fire pit for lease on the beach, or even those cabanas. They were worried they were going to have to get tideland leases for all those. Before this bill was passed today, there was some amendments added, which specifically still requires a tidelands lease for everything south of the seawall, but this tidelands lease will not restrict them, meaning they can still operate how they want to. They won't have to get state permission to do rentals or anything like that, as long as there's no gaming component, which is a really important addition to this amendment.
Yeah, so gaming, that essentially is the whole motivation behind tidelands and any changes there to the rules. So RW Development was already getting ready to move forward. They had gotten favorable tidelands rulings in the courts to build the pier there, potentially to lead the way for a casino at Veterans. If you're familiar with this area, it's right across from Big Play on Highway 90 in Biloxi. So with this latest legislation, is this development potentially in danger of moving forward?
Well, from my talks with Tim Holloman, who was the Harrison County's attorney, he says that RW Development is still willing to build that pier. Of course, all this happened because Biloxi and Harrison County entered into a partnership with RW Development to build Veterans Avenue Pier, which would give RW Development Tidelands property. You need Tidelands property to build a casino. So RW went to the Gaming Commission and said, hey, I have Tidelands property here. Can I have a casino? And the Gaming Commission said yes. The Secretary of State stepped in, and that's why they had that whole lawsuit. But the lawsuit was simply about the pier. It wasn't about the casino aspect of it. So this amendment prohibits him or anybody else from doing a Tidelands project, like building a pier and then claiming Tidelands rights to build a casino.
So we still have a long way to go for sure. This will certainly, there will be more action in the courts, so to speak. Also, the Long Beach casino development that has been talked about for many years, that's also been in the courts over Tideland, so that's potentially an impact there in Long Beach. And I believe you talked to the city attorney in Long Beach. What was his feelings?
Well, his main concern was how the Senate Bill 2780 requires any new casino to have direct property rights all the way to the tidelands and not be impeded. So where the casino was going to come on Long Beach, the proposed area was the old Kmart building, I believe it was, just north of the yacht club. They couldn't build it there because directly in front of them, blocking the tidelands, is the yacht club. So they would have to buy all that property. And that's another big issue with this bill that a lot of people have been telling me about, is that none of these casinos can be on or adjacent to sand beaches. And if you look at our coast, the majority of it is beaches. So it kind of makes you wonder where any casino would be allowed to build, although there is the argument that the Secretary of State is just simply trying to protect our beaches and protect public access to those and make sure that casinos aren't blocking people from being able to enjoy our beaches.
Okay, it is an interesting story to follow. Certainly a lot of layers to it, Noah, and we appreciate you breaking it down for us. Otherwise, you're doing pretty good?
Yep.
Yeah, all right, okay.
Busy.
All right, Noah Noble, our man on the street, so to speak, always gathering the news. Noah, thanks for joining us tonight, and we also thank you for joining us, as always, here on the WLOX Digital Desk, and be sure to join us at 10 o'clock for the latest news developments and weather headlines on the newscast at 10 o'clock. Live in the WLOX newsroom, I'm Hugh Keeton. Have a great night.